This material is a comprehensive exploration of how to combat modern digital burnout by applying ancient philosophies like Stoicism, Taoism, and Zen to daily habits. I can see what you're going for here. Let's see how we can strengthen this.
Yeah, unifying the abstract philosophical frameworks with the modern tactical advice will elevate the material from, just a collection of good ideas into a cohesive lifestyle manifesto.
Right, because right now it feels a bit split.
Exactly. The text essentially reads as two disconnected pieces. You start off with this really deep dive into ancient philosophies.
Seneca, Lao Tzu, Epicurean.
Yeah, all of that, and it's beautifully written. But then you hit the second half, and it's followed by a very standard modern productivity guide. We're suddenly talking about 24-hour input fasts, environment purging, and creator rituals.
So a key theme running through this material seems to be this contrast between ancient wisdom and modern chaos.
Right, that's the core tension.
But when we get to the tactical sections like the environment purge or the creator ritual, the ancients just vanish. I imagine this is like building a beautiful, intricate stone foundation for a house, but then dropping a generic prefab modern structure on top of it. Does this abrupt structural shift disrupt the author's intended tone?
Oh, absolutely. Once that tactical advice begins, those profound philosophical frameworks established earlier are largely abandoned, which creates this really disjointed structural shift.
It gave me a bit of mental whiplash, honestly. I went from reading about the Tao to reading about deleting apps off my phone.
Yeah, the how suddenly loses the why. So is the connection between A and B fully established in the material, or is that an area to potentially bolster? The suggestion here is to weave the specific philosophical lenses directly into the step-by-step modern exercises.
Making the ancients the explicit why behind the modern how.
Exactly. For concrete examples, when explaining the environment purge, do not just frame it as a standard productivity hack to delete apps or clear your desk.
Which is what every tech blog says to do.
Right. It's too generic. Instead, explicitly frame it as an exercise in Zen emptiness or Taoist spacemaking. Introduce the concept of Wu Wei.
Oh, effortless action.
Yes. You're not just organizing papers. You're emptying the bowl so it can hold pure potential.
Wow, yeah. That turns a mundane chore into a sacred practice.
And you can do the exact same thing when outlining the creator ritual. Tie it directly back to the Stoic concept of agency.
Like Marcus Aurelius?
Spot on. Bring in Marcus Aurelius' practice of stripping away the non-essential to focus on virtue. Make those ancient voices active participants in the modern solutions.
Because Stoicism is all about the dichotomy of control, right? What's up to us versus what isn't.
Exactly. You can't control the algorithm, but you entirely control the pen moving across the paper. That makes the modern habit feel monumental.
And now that we are integrating the philosophy directly into the modern habits, let's look at the actual language and definitions we are using for those habits.
Refining the definition of consumption will prevent the arguments from sounding like standard internet productivity advice and honor the nuance of the Epicurean philosophy introduced earlier.
Because right now, the material leans heavily on a pretty strict binary.
It really does. The weakness here is that it relies heavily on a rigid modern binary that frames basically all consumption as a passive dopamine-driven trance and all creation as inherently meaningful.
Which is a huge generalization.
It is. And this broad-stroke demonization of consumption actually contradicts the text's own earlier accessions.
Wait, how so?
Well, earlier on, the author argues that deep reading, quiet conversations, and philosophical reflection,
which are forms of consumption.
Exactly. It says those are highly valuable to a well-lived life. So the text accidentally argues against itself.
Let's look closely at the section discussing the 24-hour input fast and the consumption trance. The material makes a strong case for taking back our attention by highlighting the dangers of endless scrolling.
It definitely hits the nail on the head there.
But if we categorize absolutely everything coming in as bad input, aren't we missing something crucial? I mean, a masterpiece novel is input. A deeply moving piece of music is input. Are we throwing the baby out with the algorithmic bathwater?
That makes sense. But could the evidence also support a different conclusion, like nourishing consumption being a vital part of the creator's journey?
Oh, nourishing consumption. I like that phrasing.
Yeah, the suggestion for improvement is to distinguish clearly between junk consumption,
mindless, algorithmic, scattered.
Right, and nourishing consumption, which is intentional, deeply engaging, and philosophical. And the best part is, The tool to do this is already sitting in the text.
The Epicurean framework?
Yes, utilize the Epicurean framework of desires already present in the text.
Okay, so Epicurus had 3 categories of desires. How do we apply those directly to the 24-hour digital fast?
So, frame mindless social media scrolling as neither natural nor necessary. It's like spiking your cognitive blood sugar.
It's junk food.
Exactly. But classify reading a difficult book or listening to an uninterrupted long-form conversation as natural and necessary nourishment for the mind.
That's the complex protein.
Spot on. So, position the input fast not as a total starvation of the mind, but as a curated Epicurean diet for the brain, where the reader is encouraged to consume better, not just less.
That completely changes the tone of the fast. It doesn't feel like a punishment anymore.
No, it feels like a reset. You're fasting to remember what real nourishment tastes like.
I love that. If we apply that level of nuanced philosophical focus to the solutions, we will find that we don't need to spend nearly as much time constantly reminding the reader why they need these solutions in the first place.
Condensing the recurring explanations of modern overwhelm will significantly improve the forward momentum of the piece and give more space to the transformative historical solutions.
Because the pacing right now is, well, it stalls a bit.
Yeah, the weakness is that the text repeatedly restates the problem state. It tells us that modern life is too fast, distracted, and exhausted at the beginning of almost every new section.
It explains this overwhelm in the introduction.
And again during the single tasking section.
And again during the 24-hour fast section.
And again in the slow living section. It really stalls the pacing and honestly assumes the reader has forgotten the core premise.
As I understand it from the notes, the argument here is that our baseline is overstimulation, but we are reminded of this fatigue constantly. If we strip these reminders away to speed up the pacing, is there a risk that focusing solely on the solutions might overlook the reader's need to feel their daily exhaustion is validated?
That's clearly laid out. I wonder, though, if we've considered that the reader, given their expertise and the fact that they've sought out this material, is already intimately familiar with this pain.
Yeah, they bought the book because they are burnt out. They already know they're exhausted.
Exactly. So the suggestion is to centralize the vivid description of the hustle culture problem entirely into the introduction, and then ruthlessly cut the repetitive problem recap paragraphs from all subsequent tactical sections to drive the momentum forward.
Okay, so concrete examples. We remove the paragraphs re-explaining attention residue, dopamine spikes, and fragmented attention from the single tasking and environment purge sections.
Yes, just delete them. The reader already gets it.
And then what do we do with all that reclaimed word count?
Use that reclaimed word count to expand on the fascinating historical anecdotes already hinted at in the text.
Like Charles Darwin's Sandwalk?
Yes! Or dive deeper into Henry David Thoreau's rebellion at Walden Pond, utilizing these rich stories to show the solution in action rather than re-explaining the problem.
I want to read a full page about Darwin's Sandwalk. Paint the picture of him kicking flints on his gravel path to keep track of his laps.
Right, because that's the perfect place to explain the default mode network in human terms.
When he's just walking, letting his brain connect the dots on natural selection without forcing it.
Exact. Show us the default mode network powering up through Darwin instead of just clinically explaining that multitasking is bad for the 4th time.
And the same applies to Thoreau. What did an environment purge look like in the 1800s?
That's such a great hook. It turns the material from a clinical self-help manual into this vivid narrative of human triumph over distraction.
It brings the abstract philosophy right down into the dirt, where the reader can see it working.
Well, let's recap what we've covered today.
Sounds good. The critique advises bridging the structural gap by weaving the ancient philosophies, like Zen and Stoicism, directly into the modern tactical habits, like the environment purge.
Right. Giving the how its why.
It also suggests elevating the originality of the piece by using Epicurean principles to differentiate between junk consumption and nourishing consumption.
Framing it as a diet for the brain, rather than just starvation.
Exactly. Finally, it recommends accelerating the pacing by consolidating the repetitive explanations of modern burnout into the introduction, making room for richer historical storytelling.
Like Darwin and Thoreau. It's going to make the whole piece flow beautifully.
It really will. We invite you to implement these actionable suggestions, rewrite your material, and submit it back to the critique for further review. We'd love to see how this evolves.